They say you can see evil in someone's eyes, but what if you couldn't tell until it was too late? Tonight we descend into the minds of predators who hide behind perfect smiles in these 8 disturbing psychopath horror stories that will haunt you. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, and if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. I've always believed that people wear their emotions in their eyes. In every psychology lecture I've ever attended, professors called them the windows to the soul, a phrase so overused it became cliché. But I never truly understood it until I met the man who lived next door. His eyes weren't windows at all, they were walls. Smooth, reflective surfaces that gave nothing back. They never flickered, never blinked, never betrayed even the smallest tremor of human feeling. When I first moved into the building, I didn't pay much attention to him. The old complex was filled with students, retirees, and drifters passing through. My focus was on finishing my thesis about empathy disorders and psychopathy, so the world outside my research felt like background noise. But from the very first day, something about him clung to me like static electricity. I remember carrying a box of books up the stairwell when he appeared, standing perfectly still at the landing, watching me. His face was symmetrical in a way that felt almost too precise, like a mannequin crafted by a meticulous hand. He offered no greeting, just stared with those glassy eyes until I muttered an awkward hello and slipped past him. At first, I convinced myself he was simply shy. Everyone has their quirks, I told myself, though my curiosity gnawed at me. Days turned into weeks, and I began noticing patterns. He left his apartment at the exact same times each day, 8 a.m. sharp and 7:15 p.m., no deviation. I never heard a TV, no music, not even the flush of plumbing from his side of the wall. It was as if his life was a series of perfectly measured intervals, a metronome ticking behind closed doors. Then came the noises. The first night, I woke to a faint scraping sound, like fingernails dragged across wood. My rational mind reached for explanations, pipes expanding, maybe a mouse in the walls. But the sound grew louder, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I lay there in the dark, heart hammering, counting each scrape like counting heartbeats. Just as abruptly as it had started, it stopped, leaving a vacuum of silence so deep it felt suffocating. The next morning, I saw him leaving his apartment at precisely 8:01 a.m., his expression as blank as ever. I nearly asked him about the noise, but froze when those lifeless eyes turned toward me. They didn't just look at me, they looked through me, like I was a variable in an equation he'd already solved. Over the next few nights, the noises intensified. Scraping gave way to soft thuds, then muffled whispers that seemed to rise from the very foundation of the building. Sleep became impossible. My mind, steeped in textbooks and case studies about sociopaths, began weaving terrifying theories. Was he rehearsing something, recording voices? Or worse, creating them? Driven by equal parts fear and obsession, I started keeping a journal, documenting every sound, every movement. Patterns emerged, like constellations drawn between scattered stars. Certain noises always preceded his departures, others followed late-night returns. It wasn't random. It was structured, deliberate, controlled. One evening, while studying, I heard a new sound, a low, guttural hum vibrating through the walls. My pen slipped from my hand as I realized it wasn't coming from his apartment. It was coming from beneath mine. I pressed my ear to the floor, breath shallow, and listened. The hum rose, almost like chanting, then abruptly stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something far worse, the creak of his apartment door opening. And footsteps, slow and deliberate, heading straight toward mine. I froze, every nerve in my body thrumming like a plucked string. The footsteps stopped just outside my door, and for a moment there was only the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then came 3 soft knocks, too slow, too polite, as if mocking the very idea of courtesy. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. After a long pause, the footsteps retreated, fading down the hallway like a predator retreating into tall grass. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the night in my desk chair, staring at my door, the journal open beside me. At dawn, when I finally dared to check the peephole, the hallway was empty. Only a faint trace of something metallic lingered in the air, sharp and cold, like the smell of blood on a coin. My rational mind clawed for answers. but my instincts screamed that I wasn't just imagining things. By day, life returned to a fragile normalcy. I buried myself in classes and research, yet the questions gnawed at me. I started digging, not into the floor, but into him. A search of public records revealed almost nothing. No family, no past addresses, no digital footprint. It was as if he'd appeared fully formed the moment he moved in. But one fragment caught my attention. A brief mention of his name connected to a psychiatric research paper from 5 years ago. The study focused on affective flatness in individuals exhibiting extreme psychopathic tendencies. The lead author? My neighbor. The revelation struck me like ice water. My neighbor wasn't just some eccentric recluse. He was a scientist, someone who studied the very disorders I'd been obsessing over. And if the noises were any clue, his work hadn't stopped. It had simply gone underground. Fueled by a cocktail of fear and morbid curiosity, I devised a plan. The next evening, when I knew he'd be gone at his precise 8 p.m. departure, I slipped into the hallway with a set of improvised lockpicks I'd purchased online. My hands trembled as I worked, heart pounding loud enough to drown out reason. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside. His apartment was immaculate to the point of sterility. No furniture beyond the essentials. No photos, no clutter, nothing to suggest a human life. It felt less like a home and more like a carefully curated stage set. But then I saw the door. A reinforced steel hatch set into the floor, partially concealed beneath a rug. The hum I'd heard before seemed to vibrate faintly through it, like a heartbeat beneath the surface. I knelt, pried it open, and descended a narrow metal staircase into darkness. The air grew colder, thicker, as if I were descending into the belly of some sleeping creature. At the bottom was a room lined with monitors and strange machinery. In the center sat a single chair surrounded by restraints. On the walls were photographs, hundreds of them, of faces frozen in various stages of terror, sorrow, rage. Their eyes had been carefully blacked out. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't research. It was obsession. My neighbor wasn't studying emotion. He was harvesting it. And then from above came the sound that turned my blood to ice. The soft click of a door closing, followed by deliberate, measured footsteps descending the stairs behind me. Some smiles are warm enough to melt walls. Others are so polished they become masks. The first time I saw him, his smile seemed like sunlight on glass. Brilliant, dazzling, but strangely cold when you reached beneath the surface. I met him on my second week volunteering at the downtown mental health outreach program, a place I'd joined to gain experience for my psychology degree. The building was a converted church, its tall stained glass windows casting fractured colors across chipped wooden floors. It smelled faintly of old books, coffee, and desperation. He walked in like he didn't belong there. Perfectly tailored suit, shoes that clicked softly against the floor, dark hair slicked neatly back. Among the frayed coats and tired eyes of our usual visitors, he was a vibrant thread woven into a tattered quilt. He introduced himself with that radiant smile and an elegant bow of his head, like a character stepping off the stage of a play. His voice was calm, measured, soothing in a way that made you lean closer without realizing it. At first, I assumed he was a donor or maybe a volunteer like me. He spoke about his fascination with human behavior, about the beauty of emotions, the art of empathy. His words were almost hypnotic, like notes in a carefully composed symphony. When he looked at me, it felt as though I was being studied, each reaction filed neatly away. But he never lingered long, always drifting from conversation to conversation, leaving behind a trail of quiet awe. It wasn't until our third meeting that the unease began to take root. We were seated alone at a back table after a particularly long evening shift. The program director had left early, and the building was nearly silent. He leaned forward, his hands perfectly still on the table, and said with a soft chuckle, "I've always been a collector." The word struck me as odd. I asked what he meant, picturing stamps or coins. His smile widened, revealing teeth that were too even, too flawless. "Not objects," he said. "Experiences, people, moments that can't be repeated." His tone was light, casual, but there was an undercurrent of something darker, like a shadow flickering beneath the surface of still water. I laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, but he didn't laugh with me. He simply tilted his head, watching me with that same dazzling frozen expression. In that moment, His perfect smile seemed less like warmth and more like a trap, a carefully constructed snare designed to lure unsuspecting. I began to notice things I'd somehow overlooked. Whenever he was around, conversations seemed to falter, like the air itself had been sucked from the room. Certain program regulars he spoke with would disappear, never to return. When I asked staff about them, the answers were vague, dismissive. Transient people move on all the time, they said. But the pattern was too precise, too intentional. Then came the night that sealed my suspicion. As I was closing up, I found a small photograph tucked beneath my notebook. It was of a woman I vaguely recognized, a regular who'd stopped attending weeks ago. Scrawled on the back in precise, elegant handwriting were 3 words: "She's part now." My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. His collection wasn't metaphorical. It was terrifyingly, horrifyingly real. And when I looked up, he was standing in the doorway, smiling at me like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That smile rooted me to the spot, a perfect crescent of white teeth framed by lips that never seemed to tremble. It wasn't joy or kindness or even malice. It was absence, like a painted mask, flawless and hollow. My throat tightened as I slipped the photograph into my pocket, forcing a shaky breath. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence filled the room like smoke, suffocating and invisible, curling into every dark corner of my mind. I muttered some excuse about being late for the bus and edged toward the exit. His gaze followed me, unblinking, dissecting. I could almost feel his attention sliding across my skin like cold hands. The night air outside was sharp with winter, but even the icy wind couldn't clear the fog of dread settling over me. I didn't stop walking until I was home, door bolted, lights blazing like fragile shields against the darkness. For hours I paced, my mind stitching together scraps of memory into a terrifying picture. The disappearances, the way he always seemed to appear before someone vanished. The casual way he'd spoken of his collection. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a process, deliberate and curated. Like an artist selecting brushes, he was choosing lives to capture, experiences to preserve. The next day, I combed through local news archives, desperate for proof. The names came together like beads on a thread: runaways, loners, people who wouldn't be missed. Their last known locations formed a circle around the city center, closing tighter like a noose. Each case ended with the same frustrating note: no leads. My hands trembled as I printed the articles, laying them out on my floor. In the center of it all, his perfect smile seemed to gleam like a signature no one else could see. When I returned to the outreach program that evening, the building felt different. The usual chatter was muted, the air tense. He was there, of course, immaculate as ever, chatting softly with a group in the corner. When his eyes met mine, his expression didn't change, but something inside me shifted. I realized with a sickening lurch that I wasn't just observing his collection. I was part of it. That night, as I left, he followed. At first it was subtle, the echo of his footsteps blending with mine on the cracked sidewalk. Then, block by block, the distance closed. I ducked into a side street, heart pounding like a war drum. When I spun around, he was standing beneath a flickering street lamp, hands folded neatly behind his back, smile gleaming like a blade in the dark. "You've been watching me," he said softly, though his lips barely moved. "That makes you special." I stumbled backward, clutching the photograph in my pocket like a talisman. His voice was calm, almost tender. "Every collection needs a centerpiece." The street lamp went out, plunging everything into darkness. For one breathless moment, there was silence. Then, behind me, I heard it. The soft click of polished shoes on pavement, deliberate and steady, coming closer. Sound has always been my world. While most people live surrounded by noise, I've made a career out of listening to what others can't hear. The subtleties hidden between vibrations and silence. Old vinyl scratches, magnetic tape warbles, the faint hiss of analog decay. These are my landscapes, my language. But nothing prepared me for the box of tapes that arrived on my doorstep one rain-slick morning. The cardboard was scorched along the edges, faintly smelling of smoke, like the aftermath of a long-dead fire. There was no return address, just a single note inside: "Restore carefully. Some things are better left unheard." Curiosity outweighed caution. The tapes were labeled with numbers and dates, scrawled in fading marker. The most recent one was from 12 years ago, the year Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital burned to the ground. I'd heard of the place. A grim institution shuttered after a scandal involving patient mistreatment and experimental therapies. Officially, the fire was ruled an accident. Unofficially, whispers of cover-ups and disappearances haunted its legacy like ash on the wind. I set up my studio, surrounding myself with familiar tools, reel-to-reel decks, noise reduction software, spectral analyzers. As the first tape began to play, a low, guttural hiss filled the room. Underneath it, fragmented voices emerged, distorted and overlapping, like ghosts fighting to speak through static. Most of it was unintelligible, but I caught scattered words. Session, compliance, frequency. My job was to clean and restore, but a cold prickle ran along my spine as I worked. These weren't just therapy sessions. Something darker lurked beneath. As the hours passed, patterns began to surface. Beneath the chaotic layers, there was always a rhythmic pulse. Faint at first, then growing stronger with each successive tape. It wasn't speech, not exactly. It was more like humming, steady and precise, at a frequency that seemed to resonate in my bones. The more I amplified and isolated it, the more it seemed to move, shifting subtly as if responding to my attention. One night, while deep into restoration, I noticed something terrifying. The hum didn't stop when I paused the tape. It lingered faintly in the room, vibrating through the air vents, mingling with the thrum of my own heartbeat. I ripped off my headphones, but the sound was still there. So subtle it could have been imagined, yet undeniably present. Sleep became impossible. Even in my apartment's silence, the hum persisted, like a phantom tone just beyond the threshold of human hearing. I started researching psychoacoustics, desperate for a rational explanation. Certain frequencies, I learned, can alter brainwaves, inducing calm or panic, even hallucinations. Some governments had experimented with sonic weapons decades ago. If someone at Blackwood had discovered the right frequency, they wouldn't just be treating patients, they'd be controlling them. As I restored more tapes, the voices grew clearer. A man's calm, authoritative tone rose above the chaos, instructing unseen listeners, breathe deeply, listen closely, obey. His words were followed by the hum, now so loud it seemed to bend the air itself. My vision swam as I realized the truth. This wasn't therapy. It was conditioning. The final tape in the box was different. Its label was burned, the numbers barely legible. As I threaded it into the deck, a wave of dread washed over me. The instant it began to play, my studio lights flickered, and through the headphones came a whisper. Not from the past, but now. Directly in my ear, it spoke my name. I tore the headphones away, heart slamming against my ribs. The whisper still seemed to hang in the room like a phantom breath, as though someone had leaned close enough to fog the air beside my cheek. My name, spoken not by a stranger, but in a voice uncannily like my own. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. An audio artifact, an illusion caused by fatigue. Yet deep down I knew this was no glitch. The hum beneath the tapes was no longer just a sound. It had become a presence. Shaking, I replayed the final tape at a lower volume. The usual distortion was gone. Instead, a clean, deliberate recording unfolded. A man's voice, calm and clinical, addressed an unseen patient. Today we move beyond observation. Today you will become part of the resonance. The hum swelled in the background, steady and oppressive, like the droning of a massive beehive. It wasn't just sound. It felt alive, burrowing beneath my skin, sinking with my pulse. Then came the screams. They rose suddenly, raw and animal, echoing through the headphones until my vision blurred with tears. The man's voice remained unnervingly steady over the chaos, issuing commands in perfect rhythm with the hum. Listen, obey, dissolve. Each word struck like a hammer against my thoughts, so much so that I caught myself mouthing them under my breath. As if my will wasn't entirely my own, I slammed the stop button, gasping, but the hum didn't stop. It continued faintly, vibrating through the walls, through me. My studio felt wrong, as though the boundaries between spaces had thinned. Desperate, I yanked open the box, searching for clues. Beneath the reels, I found a charred folder of patient files. The names matched those from Blackwood's scandal, patients who'd supposedly perished in the fire. But beside each name was a notation. Converted. One file was different. The patient's name had been burned away, leaving only a date, the night of the fire. Attached was a photograph of a doctor, his eyes sharp, his smile disturbingly serene. Scrawled across the back in jagged ink were the words, the sigh louder until it seemed to seep from every corner of the room. My lights dimmed, shadows trembling like figures just beyond reach. I realized, with a rush of icy clarity, that the doctor hadn't died in the fire. He had transcended it. His experiments hadn't been about manipulating patients. They were about transcending physical boundaries, embedding his will in sound itself. My phone buzzed on the desk. With trembling hands, I lifted it to my ear, but there was no voice on the line, only the hum, impossibly clear, impossibly close. Slowly, beneath the steady drone, words began to form, echoing in perfect rhythm with my own heartbeat. Breathe deeply. Listen closely. Obey. My hands moved without my consent, pressing play on the final tape again. This time, I didn't hear it through the speakers. I heard it inside my skull, vibrating like a second consciousness. And over it all, like a conductor guiding an unseen orchestra, came that whispering voice again, this time from directly behind me, warm and cold at once. It said my name, and then, softly, "You are ready to join the silence." I've spent my career staring into the darkest corners of the human mind, but there is one case I can never fully explain. It begins, as many nightmares do, with something deceptively ordinary. A single empty chair in a windowless interview room. I can still see it clearly, the metal legs scraping against cracked linoleum, the harsh overhead bulb casting a circle of light that felt more like a spotlight than illumination. That chair became a stage where truths were spoken and lies were born. The first suspect was a trembling young man named Peter Vance. He confessed immediately, voice shaking, to the brutal murder of a woman found buried in shallow woods outside the city. But as he described the crime, his details didn't match the evidence. He spoke of a red scarf wrapped around the victim's neck, but the actual victim had been strangled with rope. When I pressed him, he doubled down, eyes wide, insisting he remembered the scarf vividly, as if burned into his memory. His confusion seemed genuine, almost childlike. Still, his fingerprints were nowhere near the scene. 2 days later, we brought in another suspect, a middle-aged nurse named Evelyn Harper. To my astonishment, she also confessed, calmly, almost serenely, to the same murder. Her version was completely different. She claimed she'd drowned the victim in a bathtub before dumping the body. No evidence supported her story either. 2 suspects, 2 confessions, both utterly incompatible with the truth. It was like listening to competing dream sequences, each one disturbingly vivid but fundamentally false. At first, I assumed coincidence. The mind is fragile under stress, and people sometimes confess to crimes they didn't commit out of guilt or fear. But as the week went on, a 3rd suspect emerged, then a 4th. Each sat in that same chair and confessed with chilling certainty. Each told a different story, with different motives, different methods, and yet the same final outcome. The victim dead, and their own hands stained with imaginary blood. Patterns began to surface like cracks in glass. Certain words were repeated across confessions. Phrases like, "it had to be done," or "I didn't want to, but I had no choice." These weren't random slips. They were seeds, carefully planted. I began to suspect that someone was orchestrating this chaos, manipulating fragile minds to bend toward their will. But who? And why? Late one night, reviewing transcripts alone, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. In every confession, there was a brief moment when the suspect glanced to their left, as if listening to an invisible cue. The room was empty. I'd been sitting across from them each time, watching, recording, and yet I had never seen what they were reacting to. The realization gnawed at me. I requested to be left alone in the interview room, just me in that chair. The silence was suffocating. I sat there waiting, and for a long time nothing happened. Then, faintly, I felt it, a subtle shift in the air, like the room itself was breathing. And in that breath, a single thought whispered through my mind. so quiet I almost mistook it for my own. Confess. My skin went cold as the door behind me clicked shut, locking me inside. I spun around, heart hammering, but no one was there. Just the empty door, sealed tight, and that damn chair waiting under the stark circle of light. My breath sounded unnaturally loud, echoing back at me like I was in a cavern instead of a tiny interview room. The whisper lingered in my skull, an aftertaste of someone else's voice disguised as my own. Confess. The word didn't just echo, it rooted itself, curling like smoke around my thoughts. I tried to ground myself, reciting details of the case, clinging to logic like a rope over a chasm. The victim's name was Clara Hensley. Time of death, 10:32 p. Most evidence. Rope fibers, disturbed soil, a shoe print we couldn't match. These facts were solid, real. But the more I repeated them, the more fragile they felt, as though each fact was merely a thread someone else could snip at will. The air grew heavy, and my ears filled with a low, barely perceptible hum. It wasn't mechanical. It felt alive, like the purr of some hidden predator. My mind wandered to the suspects who had sat in this room before me: Peter, Evelyn, the others. I remembered the blank looks in their eyes as they spoke their lies with perfect conviction. They hadn't been lying at all. They'd been guided, puppets dancing to strings they couldn't see. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I was any different. When the door finally opened, my team rushed in, their faces pale. They claimed I'd been inside for over 3 hours, though to me it felt like minutes. One of them, Detective Larson, grabbed my shoulder and asked what had happened. His voice sounded distorted, like it was coming through water. I tried to answer, but stopped when I saw his eyes flicker, just for a split second, toward that same invisible spot to the left of the chair. The same glance every suspect had made. From that moment, paranoia took root. I began watching everyone around me, noticing subtle cues I'd missed before. A shared phrase, a synchronized shift in body language. It was everywhere, woven through my team like an invisible thread. Someone wasn't just manipulating the suspects. They were manipulating us. I dug deeper, reviewing security footage from the station. Frame by frame, I searched for anomalies. That's when I saw it, a flicker of distortion, like heat haze hovering near the chair. Not a person, not exactly. More like a ripple in reality itself, pulsing in time with that low, hypnotic hum. And in that ripple, for just an instant, a face appeared, calm, expressionless, and smiling. The truth crashed over me with terrifying clarity. There had never been multiple killers, only one mind using others as conduits. A true psychopath, so skilled at manipulation they didn't need weapons, only thoughts. The victims weren't chosen at random, neither were the confessors. Each one was part of a grand design, a psychological maze with me at its center. As I stared at the footage, my reflection appeared in the dark monitor. My lips were moving, forming words I couldn't hear. Slowly, I turned my head to the left and realized I was no longer certain whose thoughts were truly mine. The house had been silent for years, but the moment I stepped inside, it felt as if the walls exhaled around me. Dust swirled in lazy spirals through fractured beams of sunlight, carrying the faint scent of mothballs and lavender, my grandmother's favorite. I'd inherited the place after her passing, a creaking, century-old relic tucked at the edge of a forgotten town. My plan was simple: renovate it, sell it, and leave the ghosts of my childhood behind. But some ghosts don't let go so easily. As I began clearing out the rooms, I found fragments of her life scattered everywhere. Old photographs curled at the edges, teacups with cracks like spider webs, letters written in looping, elegant script. In her bedroom, beneath a false bottom in her dresser, I discovered something far stranger: a stack of leather-bound journals, their covers worn soft with age. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago, back when my grandmother had worked as a nurse at Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. Her writing was precise, clinical at first, detailing her daily rounds and patients she cared for. But soon the tone shifted. One patient consumed her attention, a man named Elias Ward. His file, she wrote, was incomplete, his history murky. Elias claimed that voices lived beneath the hospital floors, whispering to him at night. My grandmother noted his words with professional detachment, but there was something in her phrasing, a subtle unease, a quiet fear that made my skin prickle. As days passed, her entries grew more frantic. She described nights when she too began to hear faint murmurs through the floorboards of the ward. At first, she blamed exhaustion, but then she started recording the exact phrases Elias claimed. To hear, "They're waiting. They see you. Beneath, beneath, beneath." I closed the journal, heart pounding. The rational part of me scoffed. My grandmother had been old-fashioned, prone to superstition. These were the ramblings of a disturbed patient and an overworked nurse. And yet, that night, as I lay in the room that had once been hers, the house seemed to shift around me. The old pipes groaned, the wind whistled through warped window frames. And then, beneath it all, I heard something impossible. A low rhythmic murmur rising from under the floorboards. It was so faint I almost convinced myself it was my imagination. Almost. I sat upright, straining to listen. The whispering seemed to move, weaving beneath the house like water in underground pipes. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. Armed with a crowbar and determination, I tore up a section of rotting floorboards in the hallway. What I found wasn't soil or foundation. It was a narrow gap, just wide enough to crawl through, leading into utter darkness. The air that rose from it was damp and metallic, carrying a stench like rust and decay. I should have stopped. Any sane person would have sealed it back up and left, but I couldn't. Something deeper than curiosity pulled me forward, a gravity I couldn't resist. Clutching a flashlight, I lowered myself into the void, unaware that I was descending into my family's darkest secret, and into the very place Elias Ward had described half a century ago. The drop was only a few feet, but the air down there was different, thicker, colder, like stepping into a tomb. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing narrow stone walls lined with moisture and streaks of black mold. The whispers were clearer now, threading through the silence like strands of spider silk. They weren't words I could fully understand, more like fragments of language carried on a current of despair. My pulse quickened. I crawled forward, my knees scraping against rough stone, until the tunnel widened into a hidden chamber beneath the house. The smell hit me first, coppery and sour, like old blood mixed with mildew. My light trembled as it swept across the room. There were rusted metal chairs bolted to the floor, leather straps hanging limply from their arms. The walls were covered in faded chalk markings, spirals, jagged lines, and what looked like fragmented phrases scrawled over and over again. Beneath, beneath, beneath. In the center of the room sat a wooden table, its surface stained dark. Beside it lay a cracked glass jar filled with something unrecognizable, pale and warped. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to move closer. There were papers scattered on the table, damp and yellowed with age. As I lifted one carefully, I recognized my grandmother's handwriting. Her journal entries had been only half the story. These pages revealed the truth. Blackwood Psychiatric hadn't been just a hospital. It had been a place of experimentation. My grandmother hadn't been merely a nurse. She had been part of a research team led by a doctor whose name was always blacked out. The experiments focused on human fear, testing whether extreme terror could make the mind susceptible to external control. Patients were exposed to sounds, low, guttural frequencies designed to bypass conscious thought. According to the notes, the voices were not hallucinations. They were deliberate, engineered. Elias Ward had been one of their most promising subjects. The notes described how he reacted with violent convulsions, claiming he could hear the voices even when the machines were off. My grandmother's final pages were smeared with frantic writing, as if she'd been trying to confess before it was too late. We went too far. The voices are no longer contained by the equipment. They live here now, beneath the floor. I am so sorry. A chill swept through me as I realized what that meant. The experiments hadn't ended with the fire that destroyed Blackwood. They had sunk into the foundation of this very house. My grandmother must have brought something home, maybe to hide it, maybe to atone. The whispers surged, louder now, as if aware of my discovery. I stumbled back, flashlight flickering. The chalk symbols on the walls seemed to shift, their spirals spinning like eyes opening. My own thoughts felt slippery, foreign, as though they no longer belonged entirely to me. Then, from the darkest corner of the room, a shape moved. Slow, deliberate. It stepped into the edge of my light, and though its face was blurred by shadow, its voice was unmistakable. "Welcome back." "Elias," it whispered. My flashlight died, plunging everything into crimson silence and a chorus of voices rising from beneath the floorboards. Some cases feel like smoke. You reach for them, and they slip through your fingers, leaving only the smell of fire to remind you they were ever there. This one was worse. It wasn't just smoke, it was a reflection in cracked glass. A mystery that seemed to warp the longer I stared at it. The first body was found beneath an abandoned overpass on the outskirts of the city. No fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers, nothing. It was as if the killer had dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only a single piece of evidence, a folded note, neatly placed in the victim's palm. Its message chilled me to my core. This isn't the beginning, it's the middle. I'd seen cryptic killers before, but this felt different. Clinical, intimate. The precision of it gnawed at me. Over the next few weeks, 3 more victims appeared in different parts of the city, each accompanied by a note. The messages grew darker, more personal. "You missed this one. You'll never get ahead of me." Each phrase felt like a whisper in my ear, like the killer wasn't taunting the world, just me. I became obsessed. My apartment walls turned into a chaotic mural of photos, maps, and strings of red thread. Sleep became a stranger I rarely saw. My colleagues urged me to take a step back, but how could I? Every note was written in the same perfect looping handwriting, and everyone seemed to know something it shouldn't. Then came the note that shattered everything. It wasn't left at a crime scene. It was slipped under my own apartment door. I found it late one night, the envelope cold to the touch. Inside was a single line scrawled in that same looping hand. "You dream of the lake house." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't told anyone about the lake house. It wasn't even a memory I fully trusted, just fragments that surfaced in dreams. A red door, the creak of a wooden dock, the smell of wet earth. My parents had died when I was young, and sometimes I wondered if the lake house had been real at all, or just a story I'd invented to cope with the grief. How could the killer know? The next day, a new body was found, this time with no note. Instead, there was a crude drawing etched into the victim's skin. A small house beside a lake with a single red door. My knees nearly gave out when I saw it. As the investigation spiraled, I began to question everything. My memories felt fragile, like pages torn from an old book and rearranged by unseen hands. I started keeping a journal, writing down every detail of my day, terrified of forgetting. Or of remembering something that had never truly happened. One night I returned home to find another note on my kitchen table, though I knew I'd locked the door. It read, "Stop writing. You already know the ending." And as I read those words, I realized with creeping horror that the handwriting looked exactly as though it were alive, breathing. My first instinct was denial. It wasn't my handwriting. It couldn't be. But the loops, the sharp cuts of the letters, they were perfect reflections of the notes I'd scribbled in my journal just hours before. My heart pounded as a memory surfaced, blurry and disjointed. Sitting at this very table, pen in hand, writing something I couldn't quite recall. Sleep-deprived paranoia, I told myself. A trick of exhaustion, yet deep down a seed of dread had already taken root. What if the killer hadn't just been watching me? What if they'd been inside me all along? I tore through my journal, page by page, looking for answers. That's when I saw it. Lines of text I didn't remember writing. Whole passages describing crime scenes in perfect grisly detail, written days before the bodies were found. The words seemed to curl off the page like smoke, as though mocking me. One entry chilled me more than the rest. "The red door will open soon. The lake house." I drove through the night, following fragments of half-remembered roads. The landscape outside blurred into a dreamscape of skeletal trees and mist-shrouded hills. When I finally reached the lake, dawn was breaking, bleeding pale gold over the water. And there it was, a small, decrepit house with peeling paint and a single red door, exactly as it had appeared in my dreams. and on the victim's skin. My legs felt like lead as I approached. The door creaked open before I touched it, as if inviting me in. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and something coppery beneath it, like old blood. Dusty furniture sat in perfect order, a stage set for a memory I couldn't place. Then I saw the walls. Photographs covered every inch, pinned in chaotic patterns. Images of the victims, of crime scenes, of me. My own face stared back from dozens of angles, some from places I didn't remember being. In the center of the room, a table was covered with notes identical to the ones left at every crime scene. My knees buckled as I realized the truth. This wasn't a killer's lair. It was mine. But before the horror could fully sink in, a voice slid through the room like silk. Calm, familiar, my own voice. "You've been chasing yourself this whole time." I spun, but there was no one there. Only the creak of floorboards beneath my feet. Memories crashed over me in a tidal wave, fragmented flashes of nights I couldn't account for, of hands writing messages I'd later discover, of victims whose last terrified faces blurred into the edge of my vision. The killer hadn't been manipulating my investigation. They'd been manipulating me. A final note lay neatly on the table, waiting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. "The perfect lie isn't told to others," it read. "It's the one you tell yourself." Behind me, the floor groaned, and then, like a curtain rising, every memory I thought was mine dissolved into darkness as the red door swung shut. It started like any other night. Me hunched over my laptop. The only light in my apartment, the pale glow of the screen. The forum had become my ritual, my unhealthy obsession. Hidden deep in the dark web, it was a gathering place for true crime fanatics who wanted to discuss the string of unsolved murders that had haunted our city for the past year. No cops, no journalists, just a handful of anonymous usernames, each of us desperate to find meaning in the chaos. We called the killer the Weaver because of the pattern they seemed to leave behind. Victims scattered across different neighborhoods, seemingly unrelated. But when you connected the locations on a map, a twisted web emerged. It was the kind of puzzle only the obsessed could love, and we were more than obsessed. We were consumed. At first, the forum felt like a safe space. We shared theories, photos from crime scenes leaked through shadowy channels, and even bits of police chatter someone claimed to have hacked. My username was Noose in Truth, and over time, certain names became familiar. Threadseeker, Red Reel, Needlepoint. There was a strange intimacy to our conversations, like whispering secrets in the dark with people you'd never meet. But then, things started to change. A new user appeared, Crimson Knot. Their posts were different. Where the rest of us speculated wildly, Crimson seemed to know things. They described crime scenes before they were discovered, details that hadn't yet been released to the public. When confronted, they brushed it off as just a good guess, but I felt a chill every time their words appeared on my screen. The night everything shifted, Crimson posted a thread titled, "You're looking the wrong way." The message was short, almost playful. "The killer isn't hiding from you. You're hiding from them." The others laughed it off, but unease spread through our group like a virus. I began to notice subtle patterns in Crimson's posts, small phrases repeated like a code. Beneath the web, the thread runs red. My pulse quickened each time I read it. As days passed, paranoia seeped into every conversation. Users started accusing each other of being the Weaver. Photos of street corners and houses appeared on the forum, supposedly linked to the case, but some of them were disturbingly close to my own neighborhood. It felt less like an investigation and more like a hunt, and I wasn't sure if we were the hunters or the prey. One night, Crimson shared a grainy image of a victim's body before the news had even reported it. The caption read, "You can't stop what you can't see." That was the moment I knew. Crimson wasn't just another user. They were the Weaver, and they were using us, feeding us lies, twisting our theories, turning our obsession into their perfect smokescreen. I typed frantically, warning the others, but my message was drowned in a flood of chaos. Accusations flew. Screenshots were posted. Someone even claimed I was Crimson, pointing to coincidences in my timestamps. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. Crimson's profile vanished, leaving only a single new thread. No words, no theories, just one image. A piece of red thread coiled neatly on a wooden floor. a floor that looked terrifyingly like mine. For a long, breathless moment, I just stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It could have been anyone's floor. Millions of people had hardwood floors, right? But as I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. In the upper corner of the photo was a faint scratch, a jagged mark shaped like a lightning bolt. I'd seen that mark every day since I'd moved into this apartment. It was under my coffee table. There was no mistaking it. My pulse thundered in my ears as I refreshed the page, hoping it was a mistake. The thread remained. No username, no timestamp, just that single image hovering like a thread in the dark. The forum, once buzzing with chaos, was completely silent now. Everyone had seen it, I knew, but no one dared to speak. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. I wanted to scream at them to help me, to call someone, to do something. But fear pinned me in place. My webcam light flickered faintly just for a second. I slammed my laptop shut, heart pounding. Had it been on this whole time? Had Crimson been watching me? I stumbled backward, every creak of the floor beneath me suddenly deafening. Memories of the past week swirled through my head. Every cryptic post, every piece of evidence we'd been fed. It hit me like a blow. Crimson hadn't just been misleading us. They'd been mapping us, learning our schedules, our fears, our locations. The forum hadn't been a hunt for a killer. It had been a trap, and we were the prey. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the screen froze. A message popped up, stark against the black background. Too slow. My blood turned to ice. The room seemed to shrink around me as I heard it, the faintest sound coming from just outside my door. A soft, deliberate scraping like fingernails against wood. I backed away, clutching my phone like a useless talisman. The whisper of the sound grew louder, closer until it stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, thick and suffocating. Desperation clawed at me. I opened my laptop again, hoping to find the others, but the forum had changed. Every thread, every username, every conversation was gone. Only one message remained, pulsing in red at the top of the screen. It was my home address. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Somewhere, someone was laughing. I could feel it like static under my skin. I typed a frantic plea for help, but my own post vanished the instant I hit send, as if swallowed whole. Then, from behind me, a floorboard groaned, the exact sound I'd been hearing in my headphones for weeks, hidden beneath Crimson's recordings. My breath caught. Slowly, against every instinct, I turned toward the noise. The last thing I saw before the screen went black was a single thread of red yarn sliding across my floor, curling toward me like the soul. But in my line of work, I've learned that some windows are painted black. Psychopaths don't see the world or themselves the way we do. Their minds are endless mazes with no center, no reflection of guilt or empathy to guide them home. My research was meant to change that. For years, I worked in secret on what I called the Mirror Project. It wasn't just glass and silver backing, it was a neural interface disguised as a simple mirror. When a subject looked into it, the device bypassed their conscious defenses and fed their brain fragments of their own hidden memories, suppressed impulses, and emotional residues. In theory, the reflection they saw wasn't merely physical. It was them, stripped bare. If a psychopath could truly confront their inner self, maybe, just maybe, the walls would crack, and humanity could seep through. My colleagues laughed when I proposed it. Some were horrified, warning me that self-confrontation on that level could be catastrophic. But I couldn't ignore the mounting body count left by one man. Marcus Vale. He was the perfect storm of intellect and cruelty, a serial killer whose crimes had turned into urban legend. He didn't just kill, he dismantled identities, leaving his victims unrecognizable in both body and spirit. Even behind bars, his presence was like a virus in the collective psyche of the city. The night I brought Marcus into the lab, a storm rattled the windows. Rain streaked down the glass like tears, and the sterile white walls seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. He walked calmly, cuffed but unbothered, his smile polite and cold. When I explained the experiment, he tilted his head with childlike curiosity, as if humoring a game he already knew he'd win. As I activated the mirror, a low hum filled the room, subtle at first, then growing into a vibration that seemed to resonate inside my chest. Marcus sat before it, staring at his own reflection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his eyes widened, not in fear, but in fascination. "I like this," he murmured, voice almost reverent. I watched the monitor, tracking neural spikes that should have been impossible. His brain wasn't just reacting, it was mirroring the machine, syncing with it in perfect, unnatural harmony. And then, without warning, his reflection moved. Marcus sat perfectly still, but the image in the mirror tilted its head toward me. My breath caught. I told myself it was a glitch, a visual lag caused by the neural feedback loop. But the reflection's smile widened, revealing teeth that Marcus himself wasn't showing. My hands shook as I adjusted the controls, but nothing changed. "Doctor," Marcus said softly, his eyes locked on the glass. "I think it likes you." I stumbled back. The reflection was no longer Marcus at all. Its features blurred and shifted, becoming something older, deeper, as though the glass were a pool and something beneath had finally risen to the surface. And then, slowly, unbearably, it began to mimic me. My reflection raised a hand I hadn't lifted. Its lips curved into a smile my face didn't wear. That was when I realized the mirror project hadn't revealed Marcus's true self. It had opened a doorway, and something was looking back. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it over the low, vibrating hum of the mirror. Marcus remained perfectly still, his breathing slow and measured, as if he'd been expecting this all along. But my reflection, that thing, moved with deliberate grace, tilting its head in mockery, eyes glimmering with a dark intelligence that was not my own. "Do you see it now?" Marcus's voice was calm, almost soothing. "It isn't showing me who I am. It's showing you what you've always been afraid to see." I staggered backward, my heel catching on the base of a monitor. Screens filled with jagged lines of data flickered wildly, as if the mirror's feedback loop was unraveling. I shouted at him to look away, to break eye contact, but his gaze was locked on the glass like a devotee worshiping an altar. The reflection spoke. Its lips moved silently at first. Then sound followed, a perfect imitation of my own voice. "You built this doorway," it whispered, each word sinking like a hook into my mind. "You believed you were studying the mind, but you were inviting us in." The room spun. I dropped to my knees, clutching my skull as fragments of memories, some mine, some alien, poured through me. My childhood bedroom, my mother's lullaby, a corridor of shadowed figures whispering in a language older than thought itself. These visions weren't just memories. They were intrusions, rewriting the story of who I was. Marcus laughed softly, the sound echoing like a hymn in a cathedral. "It's beautiful, isn't it? We spend our lives staring into mirrors, thinking we see ourselves. But what if mirrors aren't for reflection at all? What if they're windows and something on the other side has been watching, waiting for someone foolish enough to open the door?" The reflection pressed its hands against the glass from inside, its movements now perfectly out of sync with mine. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, glowing faintly as if lit by embers beneath. Each fracture hummed in a tone so low it rattled my teeth. I scrambled for the control panel, desperate to shut it down. My fingers danced across switches and keys, but the commands failed. The mirror wasn't responding to me anymore. It was responding to itself. Then I heard my own voice behind me. I froze, blood turning to ice. Slowly, mechanically, I turned my head. There, just beyond the mirror, stood me, or rather, a perfect copy, wearing a smile too wide to be human. Its eyes burned with recognition, as though it had been waiting to step through for centuries. Marcus's cuffs clattered to the floor. He hadn't removed them. They'd vanished, dissolved like mist. He rose with reverence, bowing slightly toward my duplicate. "I knew you'd come," he said, voice trembling with awe. Before I could run, the mirror shattered outward, glass flying like 1,000 silver blades. My duplicate lunged forward, its movements impossibly fluid. The last thing I saw was Marcus's grin reflected in 1,000 shards, as my own hands, no longer under my control, reached toward the dark, ancient thing that now wore my face. When I first met Alex, it felt like stumbling into sunlight after years of cold shadow. We met at a quiet coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, and something about their presence warmed me instantly. They listened when I spoke, not just politely, but deeply, as though every word I said mattered. Their laughter was soft and rare, like a secret you had to earn. After years of fractured relationships and near misses, I found myself daring to believe that maybe finally I'd found someone who truly saw me. The first months were a blur of tenderness. Alex seemed to anticipate my needs before I voiced them. A cup of tea appeared when I couldn't sleep. A hand on my back steadied me during crowded subway rides. We built routines like small rituals, Tuesday night dinners, Saturday morning walks, late night talks beneath the hum of streetlights. Their touch was always cool, almost unnaturally so, but their words were warm enough to make me forget. It was only later, in the quiet spaces between moments, that small cracks began to show. I'd mention a conversation we'd had, only for Alex to insist it had never happened. A photograph of a weekend trip disappeared from my phone, and when I asked, they tilted their head with a puzzled smile, saying, "We never went there." At first, I blamed myself. I'd been under stress, losing track of things. Memories are fragile, after all, like glass, easy to distort when held up to the wrong light. But the inconsistencies grew sharper. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain I'd heard someone whispering my name, only to find Alex lying beside me, perfectly still, eyes open in the dark. Once, while clearing out a drawer, I found a notebook I didn't recognize. Inside were pages of meticulous handwriting, my daily habits, favorite foods, deepest fears, all cataloged with clinical precision. My stomach twisted as I realized every detail of me was being recorded like data. When I confronted Alex, they didn't deny it. They simply closed the notebook and placed it gently on the table. Their expression was calm, almost tender, as if explaining a difficult truth to a child. "You're remembering wrong," they said softly. "You always do. That's why you need me." A storm brewed inside me, confusion, anger, dread. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but their voice was so soothing, so steady, that the fight drained from me like water from a cracked glass. By the end of the conversation, I wasn't sure if I'd misunderstood or if they'd rewritten my reality entirely. That night, I lay awake, replaying every moment we'd shared. Were those memories mine, or ones Alex had placed carefully in my mind like fragile seeds? Outside, the world felt vast and indifferent. Beside me, Alex reached out with their perpetually cold hands, holding me close as though to protect me from some unseen harm. But as their heartbeat thudded steadily against my ear, a single thought pulsed louder than fear. What if the person I love Sunlight streamed through the blinds like fragile threads of gold, but its warmth didn't reach me? Alex moved through the kitchen with their usual grace, humming softly as they brewed coffee, as if the night before had never happened. I watched them, every gesture now laced with menace. The way they smiled, the way they tilted their head. Had those always been rehearsed? Carefully curated performances like lines in a play designed to keep me docile? I decided to test them. Over breakfast, I mentioned a childhood memory, a specific story about my mother's lullabies. Alex's reaction was instantaneous, too perfect. They laughed at all the right places, echoed my emotions with precision. But there was something unnatural in their timing, like a puppet show where every string was pulled a second too soon. By midday, I was spiraling. I left the apartment under the guise of running errands and found a quiet corner in the library to gather my thoughts. I flipped through my phone's gallery, searching for proof of our shared life, but entire albums were missing. Trips we'd taken, dinners with friends, even selfies from ordinary nights, gone. My pulse quickened as I scrolled, realizing my past was vanishing one fragment at a time. When I returned home, the apartment felt different, too quiet, too staged. Alex sat in the living room, hands folded neatly, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Their eyes glimmered with something colder than I'd ever seen before. "You've been wondering, haven't you?" they said, voice soft but laced with finality. "Why things don't add up, why pieces are missing." My throat tightened. "What are you doing to me?" Alex's expression didn't waver. "I'm not hurting you. I'm studying you." The words fell like a guillotine. They rose and walked toward me with measured steps, every movement deliberate. "This relationship, every moment we've shared, has been part of an experiment. I wanted to know how long it would take to completely fracture a human heart without ever laying a hand on it. Their tone was clinical, detached, as though discussing a lab report instead of my life. My knees buckled. So none of it was real? The question escaped as a whisper, raw and desperate. Alex tilted their head, almost sympathetically. Your emotions were real. That's what made it beautiful. I needed authenticity to measure the depth of your breaking. They reached out, their perpetually cold fingers brushing my cheek. I recoiled as if burned. Memories collided in my mind. Our laughter, our fights, the nights I believed I was safe in their arms. Each one now felt poisoned, rewritten. I couldn't tell where truth ended and manipulation began. Alex's final words shattered what little strength I had left. I've collected every piece of you, they murmured, holding up the closed notebook. And now there's nothing left to study. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, as the walls seemed to close in. When I turned to flee, Alex didn't follow. They simply watched, serene and still, as though they had already predicted my every move. Even now, as I sit alone with my thoughts, I can't escape one haunting question looping endlessly in my mind. Were my feelings ever mine? Or were they just another variable in Alex's experiment? Some stories are too dangerous to tell, but for me, danger has always been irresistible. As an investigative journalist, I've spent years chasing shadows, unraveling cold cases, interviewing broken families, stitching together fragments of tragedies long buried. Yet nothing ever haunted me like the legend of Samuel Dredge. Dredge was more than a killer. He was a myth wrapped in flesh, a manipulator who turned confession into performance art. During the late 80s, his reign of terror left a trail of bodies across 3 states, each victim carefully posed, each scene accompanied by cryptic symbols etched into the walls. But what fascinated me most were his words. Dredge didn't just kill, he narrated his killings, leaving behind audio tapes that felt like twisted bedtime stories. The final tape was said to have been lost in the chaos of his arrest. Some believed it never existed. Others whispered that the FBI buried it to keep the public safe. For years, it was nothing more than urban legend. Until last month, when an anonymous package arrived at my office. The box was old and battered, smelling faintly of mildew and rust. Inside, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, was a single cassette labeled simply, "The End." There was no return address, only a scrap of paper bearing 4 words in shaky handwriting. Play it. Finish it. My pulse raced as I set up my recorder, hands trembling with anticipation. I had spent so many nights poring over Dredge's earlier tapes, memorizing his cadence, dissecting his psychology. This was supposed to be my magnum opus, the story that would finally cement my career. The tape clicked on with a hiss of static. Then his voice slid through the speakers, smooth, deliberate, unnervingly intimate. "Hello, listener," Dredge said, as if he were sitting right beside me. "I've been waiting a very long time for you." I froze. The phrasing was odd, but what unnerved me most was the tone. It wasn't directed at an audience. It was aimed specifically at me. "You've been digging through my past, haven't you?" he continued. "Reading the articles, following the threads, thinking you're the one in control." A low chuckle bled through the static. "But here's the twist. You're not the storyteller. You're the story." My rational mind scrambled for explanations. It had to be coincidence, or perhaps the package sender had known about my work. Still, unease slithered beneath my skin. Dredge began recounting his crimes in graphic detail, but something was different this time. Between the descriptions, he started weaving in details of my life. The exact street where I lived, the bar where I met my ex, even the nickname my father used to call me as a child, something I'd never shared publicly. My breath hitched. This was impossible. As the tape rolled on, his words became commands rather than recollections. "When this side ends," he said, voice silky and assured, "you'll feel compelled to flip it. You won't be able to stop yourself. And when you do, I'll tell you what happens next, step by step." The final seconds were a whisper, so faint I had to press my ear to the speaker. Look behind you. Every muscle in my body locked. My breath caught in my throat, frozen like the air before a storm. I didn't want to turn, but my neck betrayed me, twisting slowly toward the darkened corner of my office. Nothing. Just shadows draped across file boxes and the dim outline of my coat hanging on the door. My laugh came out shaky, hollow. This was absurd. Dredge had been dead for decades, executed in a sterile room with a needle in his arm. His voice couldn't reach me from beyond the grave. It had to be a trick, a carefully constructed performance designed to prey on paranoia. Yet the pounding in my chest told me something deeper. This wasn't just a recording, it knew me. I ejected the tape and stared at it, my reflection warped on the glossy black plastic. Logic screamed at me to destroy it, to bury it in the deepest drawer and forget it ever existed. But curiosity has teeth, and it sank into me. My fingers moved as if separate from my will, flipping the cassette to the other side and pressing play. A pause, then Dredge's voice returned. Closer now, almost warm. Good, he purred. I knew you'd listen. You always do. The air in the room seemed to constrict. As the tape rolled, Dredge described events not as memories but as prophecies. You'll leave your apartment soon, he said. You'll convince yourself you're chasing answers, but every step will lead you deeper into my story. I swallowed hard, glancing at my packed bag by the door. I'd been planning to visit the old prison ruins where Dredge had been held, a trip I'd scheduled before this tape even arrived. A chill crept up my spine. Then he spoke my full name. My address. Even the color of the shirt I was wearing. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of files. You feel like the hunter, Dredge continued, his voice almost playful. But the moment you pressed play, you became the prey. I don't need to be alive to finish my masterpiece. All I need is a narrator. Someone to carry my story forward. The tape hissed. For a moment, only static filled the room, until another voice emerged beneath it. My own. It was faint, trembling, a perfect echo of my fear. Why are you doing this? My voice asked through the speakers, though I hadn't spoken a word. Dredge laughed, a sound so cold it felt like frost spreading across my skin. Because every story needs an ending, he said, and endings require sacrifice. The final moments unfolded like a ritual. Dredge gave precise instructions, telling me where to go, what to bring, what to say. Each detail matched thoughts I hadn't yet had, choices I hadn't yet made. As the tape clicked off, the room was plunged into silence. Then, beneath the static, a final whisper curled through the air. Congratulations, listener. You're no longer writing about me. You are me. My reflection in the darkened window smiled back at me, though my lips hadn't moved at all. Subscribe, if you dare.